conference line, speak to Professor Walid Phares, who's author of a new book entitled The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. It is published by Threshold Editions, a division of Simon & Schuster, available at bookstores everywhere. Let me just tell you, Professor Phares is a Fox News terrorism and Middle East expert and advisor to the U.S. House of Representatives Caucus on Counterterrorism, and he teaches global strategies at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Professor Phares.
Good morning to you. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Thank you so much. In reading your book, I think I am summarizing properly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're advocating is that America and other countries that support democracy and the practice democracy need to strengthen the voices of democracy in places where those voices are not allowed to be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the essence of the book. Basically, what I've done this decade, I've published 3 previous books. They're titled the Future Jihad Trilogy. I focus on how many jihadi forces are rising in the Middle East, from the Iran, Pasdaran, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, down to Somalia's Shabab. So we have a pretty good idea about the map of where these forces are rising. The other map was unknown to most Americans. That is, where do we have a rise of democracy forces that are struggling against these jihadi forces, against these regimes? And that's why I wrote the book, and I'm advocating and calling on the U.S., other democracies around the world, to basically support those who are struggling. I mean, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are societies that are rising, they are crushed, and it is in our interest to be, standing with them, as we did with the dissidents and democracy forces under the Soviet threat.
Yeah. I look at, for example, in Iran, we saw courageous people committed to freedom who were silenced in many cases, and we, in my view, we abandoned them. We didn't do enough to be at their side, to give them the kind of support they want and deserve.
Unfortunately, this was the case. And back in June of 2009, we saw, the American public, it was not an issue of experts explaining to us. We saw on our TV screens 1.5 million people demonstrating in the streets of Tehran, 60% or so of them females. And the majority of all demonstrators were under 19 and 18 years old. This is the future of Iran. This was an absolute opportunity for us to seize, not to do anything, physical, just words, and we failed with words. What is it that we said out of Washington, what the administration said? We don't meddle. Imagine we would have said this about Lech Walesa, or Václav Havel, or in South Africa, or in any other place that we, these are domestic things. So where are human rights? We talk about human rights. We are part of the international community. When it comes to Iran or the Middle East or the Muslim world, we fail, unfortunately.
Why is that so? I think it's no secret that if we don't somehow resolve the Iranian threat, we're not going to see peace in different places. You look at Lebanon today. Hezbollah is so much in control, ruled by Iran. You look at Gaza, where Hamas is in control and supported by Iran. So if we don't, if we don't look at the head, if we don't look at the real serious threat to us, how are we gonna solve anything?
Absolutely. The Iranian threat is the leading threat. Dealing with it, it's basically ending at least half, not more, of what we call the war on terror, because we have 2, emerging jihadi threats. The Salafi one, which is larger by numbers, such as Al-Qaeda, or those radicals coming from the Sunni background, do not represent all Sunnis, but this is where they come from. And then you have the other threat coming from the Shia background, the Khomeinists, who in fact are embodied by the Iranian regime and have an intervention in Iraq. They are planning on seizing 2/3 of Iraq as we speak now, as we are redeploying out of Iraq. They have a strategic alliance with the Syrian Ba'athist regime. They have a presence in Lebanon, which is growing, as you said, exactly. and Hezbollah now has full control over the country and can trigger any time a war with Israel, which would be devastating because Hezbollah has more than 40,000 rockets. But beyond that, really, Iran is playing the role of a very bad Soviet Union by having its interests as far as Africa, in Eritrea, in Yemen, and they have signed a strategic treaty with Venezuela, with Hugo Chavez. So we're not just talking about a domestic issue in Iran. We're talking about an international threat in addition to the nukes. So again, when we bring it back to the first point here, we have seen the civil society in Iran rising and telling us we can do that change, and we fail. That's a strategic failure, unfortunately, on behalf of the administration.
We're speaking with Professor Walid Phares, author of the new book, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. We talk about sanctions, and while it's nice to speak about them, I'm not convinced that we're actually seeing them. There's a report in the paper the other day that all of these exceptions are being given to various firms, allegedly under the aegis of humanitarian supplies, and yet when you look at what's being permitted, it's a stretch to call it humanitarian. So how is Iran hurting when the sanctions are not serious sanctions?
If the sanctions are not coupled with what we call sanctions plus, i.e. other measures that would come and actually weaken the regime and open up for the opposition to move forward, if these sanctions are not accompanied with a international tight pressure on Iran, if these sanctions are not also accompanied with measures where Iran has its own intervention, such as containing Hezbollah in Lebanon, containing Hugo Chavez, making sure that those countries who are dealing with Iran are not, dealing with us, we're not doing sanctions at the end of the day. And you're right, it took basically WikiLeaks to tell us that, these are not real sanctions because the government, the administration, the bureaucracy knows that the Iranian regime is doing business elsewhere. And just to give a couple examples of how, if we're not serious about it, the Iranian regime, of course, can outmaneuver us. Ahmadinejad came to Lebanon a few weeks ago. And what we realized is that the Iranian economic circles of the Pasdaran, the ruling force in Iran, are in Beirut doing business, buying whatever they want from the international market, what have you. They ship it to Syria and from Syria to Iran. So who are we fooling here? Second, our so-called ally, the AKP government of Turkey, is basically open, have an open border, signed strategic alliance with Syria and open everything to the Iranian regime. So if you want to be serious, we've got to be serious.
Explain something to me, because I can't fathom this level of hatred. People go to a church to pray, and they're killed. Parents take pride in children who become suicide bombers, glorify them after they've taken the lives of others and their own lives. It's something that we certainly not only don't condone, we don't comprehend.
Look, when I was born and raised in Beirut, came here 20 years ago this year. When I came here 20 years ago, the same questions were there. But not with this intensity, because this was way before 9/11, way before all the jihadi war on democracies. I have examined the phenomenon of jihadism when it was born, just before through the Cold War. It is much older than that. It is not just a reaction to our U.S. policy. It's not an issue that has to do with Israel and the Palestinians. If you are a suicide bomber coming from Pakistan or from Abdul Muttalib coming from Nigeria, there must be something else, and that's something else, that hatred is created by a factory. Let's go back, although we shouldn't compare, everything is not comparable, but in the 20s and the 30s, the National Socialist movement that destroyed so much and was responsible for genocide and the Holocaust, it was based on an ideology. And short of dealing with this ideology, it's going to be always the same. Totalitarian movements, including jihadism, are based on an ideology. And the ideology which is behind jihadism and all these actions comes at a very young age and hits you by education and indoctrination. This is where you find that an individual who says, well, I'm going to become a shaheed or a suicide bomber because of Palestine or because of Iraq. Well, this information, this indoctrination, he got it at a very young age, where forces such as the Salafist, the Wahhabi, the petrodollars are at work. So it's not just a collective hatred, it's manufactured. It's actually created by a force, a political, ideological force.
We used to think that, it was a hatred that was connected to poverty, and then we saw people 9/11, pre-9/11, post-9/11, who have degrees, who are successful, and are committed to human destruction.
Absolutely. I mean, the economic factor that was prevalent among European intellectuals and some of our Ivy League professors saying, it has to do with the third world and poverty. Well, those who are funding this out of the Arabian Peninsula, the oil-producing regimes, are among the richest in the world. Yes, there are the poor people who have been indoctrinated, and then you have the middle class. And what would a middle-class daughter in the United Kingdom, 45 of them have been arrested. They make more money, I think, than you and I combined. What would they do with it if it's for economic reasons? So it is basically an elite which is sitting behind that and pushing that ideology, claiming it's about social economics, and others have claimed that it's about race and racial issues and stressors. Well, no, the jihadists are omnipresent now across all ethnic groups. All ethnic groups have been penetrated by the jihadists. And the last argument that was used, or the oldest one actually, it's because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Oh, you solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, everybody will be like in Sweden or New Zealand in the Middle East. Well, tell me about Sudan. 1.5 million black people have been decimated over the years. What is the link to the Arab-Israeli conflict? Tell me about Lebanon being occupied by the Syrians for 32 years, and on and on and on. And yet, the jihadists rose way before the formation of the State of Israel. 1947-48. The Salafists began in the 20s. So all these arguments that were pushed by the elites are gone now, and we begin to see clear that this is an imperialist ideology functioning like the other totalitarian ideologies.
Professor Walid Phares, author of the new book, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. Thank you. Thank you for opening the eyes of so many who I think need to see the problem in a more serious fashion. There's a naivete that sometimes takes hold of someone's soul, and people think, we can just, wish it away, pray it away. It hasn't gone away. It won't go away until we confront it in a direct fashion. So you've done much over the years, and we continue to listen to your voice, and hopefully you'll continue to have success in convincing others of the need to do more.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. Professor Walid Phares.